So, like I was trying to say, when you drop the files in from this competition, or generally from almost any mix you get sent these big block wave files that are very, very long and just look like that. So, in Reaper, a nice little trick you can do is if you select everything, when you get these files, make sure they're in your project. I've named these all so they're nice and neat. Rather than Johnny's naming system, I have a slightly different one in folders upon folders upon folders. So I did that, then I went to Actions. Now if you click Show Action List in Reaper, it gives you literally everything that this program can do. And that's a massive, massive, massive list, which you couldn't possibly have shortcuts for them all. If you filter it with the word silence, there's one that's called Remove Silence, Auto Trim Split Items. I've given it a shortcut, Alt and T. It doesn't have one by default. If I double click that, then it gives me these options. And generally the defaults, if I'm at a threshold -90, basically means if there's a load of actual silence in a wave file, say you've exported something and there's just a big bit that's silent, it will just cut that out and remove it. Which means that it doesn't change the sound at all, but instead of those big block wave files, I can now see the mix. I can see where it doesn't have any audio at all. I can then go in, and if I need to edit anything to make it cleaner, I can do so, and I'm not having to panic. The next thing that I did is I brought in Johnny's mix. Which is, I don't consider that cheating, because what I generally tend to do when a client sends me a rough mix is I tend to have that in the project if I ever need to go back to it. Not because I think their mix is necessarily the target, but from a creative standpoint, quite often an artist will put creative choices into their rough mix that will then get lost. For instance, there's a section in this middle 8 where if you listen to this, there's a scratchy guitar. And it's actually going, which, because we get given the DIs for the guitars for this, that's not on there. Which means every mix that I've seen, Fortiori, Johnny, mix crit so far, none of them have had that in there. So I tend to go through a rough mix and make notes like that. Like, put a trim there. That kind of thing. I don't necessarily have to, in my mind, have the same exact plugin. I don't have to have the same sound, but to me, that's a creative choice he's made. And if it was me, I would want to hear that if I sent my track off to a mixer. Also, there's a section somewhere here. There's a clean guitar in here. That has a big stereo delay on it. So I'm making notes like big timed stereo delay on the clean guitar. What else? The intro. The guitar was labeled fuzz guitar. And he really meant it. That's not an overdriven amp sound to me. That is a fuzz pedal into an amp sound. And then there's these. If we listen, there's a doomph and a k. Where on the original, if the kick and snare we got given on their own are quite underwhelming. So again, I'm making mix notes like heavily filter and really give a lot of reverb to that kick. Put a timed rhythmical delay on the intro snare, so those are going to be separate effects. Those are the kind of things I would go through the rough mix for. If there's anyone has any questions, by the way, fire away in the chat, because we now know from me having to ask you whether the sound was working at the start, typically, that the chat works. So by all means, fire away. This is not mixed as well. This as I have it. Cool. So this is what I would consider mixable. The way that I tend to think is you've got your recording engineer, then you've got kind of a mix assistant in the middle between that and the mix engineer. So what I've done, that's really annoying if the sound's going to keep cutting out like that. I wonder if I've been through and made sure that everything's set right, but this ID44 seems to be insisting that it's running in 96k, even though everything else is running in 48. I had to turn it off and on again. Interesting thing about the ID44 is it has an on and off switch. But yeah, right, so where were we? That's really, really annoying. Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to edit this and put it up afterwards as a separate video to try and get rid of all those separate parts. Anyway, what was the last thing that I said that you guys heard? Talking about picking bass and guitar amps, because that's pretty much where I was at in terms of headspace, at the very least. Yeah, because for me, choosing bass and guitar amps should be part of a production process, not part of a mix. Although so that's why in this case I've gone ahead and chosen amps and got sounds for them before the mix. Slate. Right, yeah, so I was talking about what I had on my master bus, which was the virtual tape machines, then, which is just adding some character, then a light compression, bit of EQ, but just a little bit of extra high and low, with the op-amp button out on that FGA, because we don't want too much character coming through there. The FG red bus compressor just tickling, not doing too much. Kazrog's True Iron is as if I was running through a console with heavily driven transformers that just give me a bit more meat to the sound. And then we've got K-Clip 3 from Kazrog, which is just taking a couple of those top transients off the top of the mix, just to stop if I get too loud, which I shouldn't do because I try and aim not to, but it should stop the odd transient or two from getting too bad and distorting the output. So we pick, so let's see, I've got a bass group here. Again, I don't consider this to be part of the mix. This is kind of pre-mix. So if we boil this down, the bass that came in was this. Which is a good sounding bass. But I've put on there a Sans amp with quite a lot of low end being added in, and virtual mix rack with a heavy compression from the FG Stress, which is a distressor, into a Neve channel strip, adding a bit more low end. Again, I consider this not to be part of the mix. This is what I would like to be presented with. And then on top, I've got Vadim Taranov's 5150. This is free, by the way. And then that's going into the Torpedo Wall of Sound with one of my cabinets, which is the Marshall 8x10 with a 421 directly in the center. And that in Reaper has its mixed backed off to 70 something %, just to let a little bit of that 5150 clean through, just so we've got a clarity on the top end. And the blend of those together means that we've got a really authoritative grit there, and also quite a thick low end. But this, again, not mixed, that's quite... it sounds like too much, but then if you listen to something like, I don't know, the first Meshuggah album, there are stems available for that, and if you listen to the bass on that, it's more aggressive than this by a long way. It's just once the guitars come in, everything starts to fight for that space, and you have to be quite aggressive. So the rhythm guitars, I was really struggling to find a sound, and I ended up with a 5150 on one side and S gear on the other side, and an 808 from TSE Audio before each one. So that sounds like this. So, unlike a lot of the mixes I've heard of this song so far, it's not got that up in the top end. And I've used Wall of Sound again. On the left side, on the 5150 side, I've used the big boy Alnico with a 57 and a 421, but I've not cranked the treble here on the amp. Everything's kind of, the bass is backed off a little bit, but the EQ's 5 or 6 out of 10. And with S gear, the cabinet on there is my big beast 4x12 Zilla cabinet with a 57 and a 421 again, and this one's got quite a lot of treble, and on that Mesa style EQ as well with a bit of a mid scoop, but I'm not going to overly EQ the top end to be too nasty here. So that's those. The intro guitar, that's using Kazrog's Ram Fuzz, which is a it's an Electro Harmonix big muff. If I turn that off, it's a Marshall JMP amp into that big beast with a ribbon and a 57, and it sounds like this. It's got no power to it, but if I was to turn the gain up here all the way to 10, that sounds good in terms of what Johnny was going for, but it's not the same as a fuzz pedal. So, that's the intro guitar. There are extra guitars. Let's have a look at the higher ones. So those are the same amp that were on that fuzz pedal, but with the channels jumped and quite a lot of gain going on. With that big beast again, with the ribbon to stop it being too harsh. Question from David Ross. If I'm trying to get a metal sound, do I run a 5150 with the gain backed off, then overdrive it with a pedal? Why not just run the gain up on the amp? Fair question. When you say gain backed off, if you were trying to get a tone out of a 5150 and say you had your gain up at 8, then your guitar will have quite a lot of low end coming out of it, and that will affect the way the amp distorts. It will make things quite flubby, it makes things quite badly defined, everything just becomes a mush, and you can't hear the separate notes. It actually sounds less heavy the higher the gain goes, because all the detail's gone. So I wouldn't really back the gain off on the amp, but say you were at 8, maybe I'd back it up to 5 or maybe 4, and then you add more volume through something like a Tube Screamer, because traditionally Tube Screamers as a pedal, they take some bass out and they add a bit of a hump of some mids before the distortion in the amp, which means that the distortion in the amp as a result ends up more defined. It's got less mud in the distortion, it becomes cleaner, because the in a lot of amps, the 5150 included, the bass, middle and treble controls go after the first stage of the distortion. So by the time that preamp is flooded with gain. It's but if you use a tube screamer in front of it, that will take away some of the and make it much more of that thing that you get in modern metal. I mean, that's very much a Meshuggah and Genty kind of approach that's been adopted by a lot of guys. Although it's not new, like Judas Priest were doing that in the 80s. The early Priest albums, the mids were very aggressive, and that's because they'd use a tube screamer in front of a heavily driven Marshall amp. Because if you think of how heavily driven a late 70s, early 80s Marshall amp would be, 10 there would be like 3 on a 5150. So that's the other thing that you have to keep in mind, is that the gain control is not equal on every amp. And especially an amp that's designed like a 5150 with cascaded gain stages, which means more gain, more gain, more gain, more gain. 10 on that control is like 50 on an old Marshall, and it can get too much. It can become just with feedback and mush everywhere. So by throwing a more focused signal at the amp, you can get much more clarity. So that's why here I've used, like, let's just quickly look at. So for me, the settings on a tube screamer, I would not have the tone at 10. I tend to have the tone in the middle, because that's kind of the no added, no removed, apart from what the circuit in the tube screamer already does. I want the tube screamer to add mids, which is what it does naturally. If you turn the tone up, it will also add high frequencies, which makes the guitar quite scratchy and quite piercing. It's not for me. Yeah, level to taste, absolutely. And the drive, yeah, the drive, I've got this at 0. You can add a bit of drive on the tube screamer. It gives you a bit of a different flavour. For the guys who are going for really tight metal, that's it. So if I turn off the tube screamer and turn up the gain on the amp, sounds pretty good, but the definition's kind of lost. If I turn that back, it's the kind of thing you notice more when you play in a live band or in the studio a lot, because when you start double tracking things, when you start fitting things in mixes, suddenly what sounded good on its own might not cut through, and what cuts through on its own quite often sounds a little bit horrible. And it's that understanding, I guess, of it being right, that, yeah, that understanding of this works, that it's hard to describe, but yeah, it really makes the difference overall. And it's the kind of thing where if I turn the tube screamers off here in front of 5150 and S-Gear, let's add the bass in as well. So that heaviness instantly, just with the bass, the definition's gone. If I turn these tube screamers on, suddenly every note, that suddenly jumps to the forefront. And that's what I'm after there with those tube screamers. Interestingly, there are some double tracks here, which I was about to get to, where I've not done that. And they sound positively filthy. And what I've done there, I've used that same jumped Marshall. If we listen to just quickly listen to the original DI for one of these guitar tracks. That's quite a lot of bass in a guitar track. And I was finding that no matter what I did, the guitar amps sounded flubby. So I added in an EQ in front where I did pretty much what a Tube Screamer does, but without the gritty distortion that a Tube Screamer does. I wanted clarity on the alternate tracks. I tend to, the way that I mix, if I've got multiple layers of something, then I tend to make the second layer slightly different I find a way to do something a bit different with it so that when they add together, they occupy different spaces in mixes and they're not fighting each other. So that's why these guitars sound oddly clean. But the thing is, as soon as I add these to the main guitar, they don't all need to be really mid-focused high gain, because if they were, that would be too much mid-focused high gain and you'd suddenly have competition in that space. By having the secondary guitars quite heavy but more focused on a clear top end and a clear bottom end, suddenly they all mesh around each other. And then there's those high guitars. And then on this guitar group, I added a tremolator from Sound Toys, which only turns on that mid-8 section. So I set that synchronized to the tempo of the track, which we're told from the files we download is 200 BPM. And I just set it to be full depth, square wave trem, and bypassed it so it turns on for that section and turns off for the rest of the song. Job done. Nice and easy. That's what we want. So I've talked about all the guitars, apart from the solo. Oh, and the clean, I used a free amp for this one. Again, I used the hybrid from Lapoo with the Big Beast again, which seems to be a reliable setup. On the Plexi with a lot less gain than usual, which sounds like this. And it sounded to me like the echo, the delay was a big part of the sound here. So I added Sound Toys Echo Boy, which is my favourite delay unit. And I went through the different styles until I found this. And then there's the solo, which is quite dry at the moment, and that's S gear without a Tube Screamer in front of it, but with the gain absolutely dimed. And the EQ quite extreme there on like a Mesa style EQ. So that goes like this. Because that's the kind of sound I would expect to be sent for a lead guitar. Again, not mixed. Right at the end of this project, let's just hit save, there are already 2 reverbs, well, technically 3 reverbs. They're not being used yet, but I tend to start my mixes with a few things in place. Let's just add I'm missing my room reverb. So just let me very quickly throw this in and then I'll talk you through it. There we go. So, I almost always on a mix have a choice of a short room reverb, very short room reverb that just can add some width. And I have a plate reverb, and I tend to have some sort of non-linear bigness. And then I've recently started adding in this gated room reverb as well, which I'll talk about later. But it's time to mix. Because the drums have had absolutely nothing done to them. The bass technically has had nothing done to it. In fact, let's just hide everything for a minute. Because one thing I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to group, or I'm going to folder all of my guitars, just in case I want to mix them, because it's something that I find quite therapeutic in Reaper, is foldering everything. Ooh. Don't want that page of automation, but foldering everything makes my life that much easier. Guitar double and guitar high. There we go. Save. Save, 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 save. Now, oh, baby is upset. Let's find a heavy bit of this song. We'll not do the vocals just yet, so I'll just mute them. Let's look solely at... Let's look at the drums first, because they probably need the most work. So, let's get Slate's virtual tape going, because this is a process I like to do. Is I'm going to slap this just on every drum track, and then that gives me a slightly fatter, warmer sound, and because it's separate on each track, I can then go through and not have as much of it if I want. I'm also going to use Kazrog's True Iron. Going to put a few dB of crush on there. This just makes it sound kind of like a console, and I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to slap that across every drum track. So that's on, that's off. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is look at the overheads. I do drums backward from quite a few people. I'm going to just loop this section, and we're going to start with Slate's Virtual Mix Rack. First thing I want is the FGA from Slate stuff, and I'm going to hit the filter button. And I'm not going to touch that top end because it's already too much for me. In fact, what I might do is bring in the custom EQ and see if I can just take some of that nastiness down. There. That's better. Because I definitely don't like drums with too much of that ultra high going on. So what's next? I want to use a 116 Modern because it just does something to drums, especially overheads for me, that just is nice. There we go. It just brings that snare out, and I like to have quite a lot of snare attacking me from overheads and ambient mics. I like to have the close mics doing as little work as possible, really, although they will end up doing a lot of work. Oh, ow. So we're going to throw the Hollywood preamp in here, and we're going to just get a lot of saturation going. And maybe take things out below 75 Hz just to stop any rumble, because we do want the low end to be quite focused. And I would want the drums to be running through an API console, because they do have quite a nice punch to them. So let's turn all this on and off at the top right. Okay, so I want to compress these overheads a bit more, I think. So I'm going to use a distressor. So I'm going to use this yellow button down here to stop it, well, to make it detect the harshness a bit more. And distortion 2 should just bring a bit more life into there. Quite a fast release, loads of attack to give me that snare. And then I'm just going to push the input as I hit play until it does what I'm looking for on the overheads, which is a bit of a smash. And I brought the output down as well so I can hear the difference when I turn this whole thing off. Just... Okay, not bad. So I'm going to just get one of Reaper's own EQs and wring out a little bit of that nastiness. So I'm just going to use one band, really kind of thin it out here, and then I'm going to sweep it around, look for that nasty... Slate bundle is a must. I absolutely think so. So... that was the overheads to begin with. Yeah, so that's my overheads. Thanks, Stevie. Yeah. So yeah, from Lombard, Illinois. Cool. Yeah. So I figured I may as well do this live, because if I'm going to enter a competition, I have limited time at the moment, because between running the studio, doing the YouTube channel, having a baby. Yeah, if I make myself do this live and talk myself through it, at least it's gonna get done. Even if I don't, win the competition, it'll make it worth it for me to talk through what I'm doing. So, hey, on to my second favourite mic set, the ambience. Okay, so in some ways they sound great, in others... they're a bit of a problem, because they're a little too far back for me in terms of ambience. If I was actually miking the kit up, I'd probably have brought those ambient mics closer to the kit, but that's just me. And so we've been sent this to mix, so we do what we can. So the low end, I'm going to bring out an SSL EQ because I need accuracy here. So I'm going to take all that low end out of the ambient mics. I don't want to, but I kind of have to. And I can hear a kind of a low mid 300 Hz kind of box. Watching my intro to Reaper. Yeah, thank you. Apologies for the sync problems on the Reaper videos. Kind of did those years ago. In fact, that first Reaper video, fun fact, I did that not for a laugh, but just kind of... I'd been producing videos in the studio and I only had a little bit of time, so at home I thought, oh, I'll just do a basics video, and it went crazy. 100,000 views. Yeah, so, little things like sync issues, that was supposed to be a throwaway video where I'd come back to it and do it properly at some point, but instead that particular video, sync issues and all, became one of the most popular videos on the channel, so, yeah. You can do what you can with what you have. Right, so I'm going to drive this with the London preamp, which is kind of the cleanest one. I'm going to push this. Ooh. So that's with the London preamp off and then on. So I'm going to combine the overheads and the ambience now. On the ambience, I'm going to use a compressor to almost uncompress it. That sounds insane, but if we listen to the ambient microphones without a compressor, it almost sounds to be on a level, and I want that snare to come out. So I'm going to use a very, very slow attack, very fast release on this 401 compressor. And 4:1 ratio, sure. And just bring the threshold down. Because of that slow attack, it's going to let that crack through the snare. So then when we bring the overall volume up, we should have more crack on that snare. So it's almost an uncompressor. So this is without, and then with. And then with the overheads. Cool. So that's already... I'm going to add in the custom series EQ at the end and just roll off a load of that top end on the ambient mics. So this is without it, and this is with. Makes it sound a lot darker, but then the overheads have all that, so... So now there's a kind of a knocking sound in the ambience that I want to get rid of. Probably do it with a digital EQ. So all the effects off. And with. Okay, so let's start thinking about a kick. So I'm really gonna crush this kick with the true iron, because doing that just makes things so nice. So this is with the kick with no processing, and then with. Nice. And then so this is where virtual mix rack comes in again. So first thing I want is to compress the kick drum to really bring that attack out. Not even EQ'd it yet. So let's bring in some more saturation. So VCC channel on the API. So then London before the EQ. This is why big studios make better sounds than home recordings usually, unless you think about it this way. Because in a big studio, you do not get a drum and get the cleanest sound out of a completely clean digital preamp. No. You go through drive, you go through saturation, you go through some distortion, you go through little bits and little bits of drive. And I've not touched the EQ yet, but just listen to this kick drum without any processing. And then with all little bits of drive and distortion. Without. I mean, sure, it's a little bit louder, but also it just sounds fat, and that's because of those little bits of momentary distortion and saturation that come in. So now, we need to get rid of some of the mud from there. Add a little bit of that sub. Add a bit of slap. Personally, I like to try and add more super high end on a kick than where you think you should. Because you think you should add in a metal mix 3K or 5K onto that kick, and that gives you this sound. Actually, I'm going to leave some of that in. But I like to add more of an air band than actual 3K. So let's listen to that with the overheads and the ambience. It sounds nasty. So if we take that high mid out and put ultra high in. Now, I'll leave that there for now. We might... Greg, hi Greg. We might come back to that kick. But in the meantime, that sounds good enough for now. I've got most of my items in place. And if I want to go and fine-tune the EQ later, I can, but it's there now. It's in. I'm not going to overly think about it because I've got too much to do with the snare. In fact, you know what? I'm going to just copy-paste that EQ whole setup over to the snare. It's not going to be right, but it's going to save me time. I'm just going to reset the EQ and then see. Oh yeah, got to solo it. Durr. Now this snare definitely needs a little bit of EQ work. Is this an acoustic drum kit, guitar bass? So this is for the Fortiori mix competition from Fortiori Johnny, The FG. Oh, like the FG. They're all FG. Distress, you mean? Because FG stands for Fabrice Gabriel, who is the designer of all these, which is why they've all got FG on it. He's one of Stephen Slate's best friends. He's a design genius. So I'm. Let me know which one you meant out of those. But yeah, so the drums were VST drums, I believe. The bass, guitars, vocals, obviously all analog, but we were sent the DIs of the bass and guitars. So this is a mixed competition that I'm entering. I'm talking through as I do it. I thought, hey, why not? I'll just give it a go. Okay, so let's add the hi-hats in. I don't tend to use them much. So, tick, 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 tick. So, one thing I do like to do is I like to distort my hi-hats a lot. Take all the low end out. And then just see how they do in the mix. Okay. So, let's find a part with some toms. And just loop that bit. So this is where mix rack comes in. So I'm going to use a bit of FG stress on these toms. Bit of distortion. Okay. And I'm gonna Hollywood these. FGA for a bit. I'll have to make it gnarly. Well, I'm gonna make it how I would make it, and we'll see what he thinks about it. I'm not expecting to win. It's one of those things, it's like, if he wants a mix like Nolly would make, and I would make a mix like Andrew Sheps would make, I might not win, but if someone notices it and likes that style of mixing, then hey. And maybe he'll like what I'm doing, maybe he won't, we'll see. There we go. So on the toms, I added more drive, compressed them pretty heavily with FG stress, added a bit of high end, quite a bit of low end, took out a little bit of that kind of low mid honk that you get. Right, so as you can see, the drum bus is clipping a little bit. Not a big fan of that. But it's only the snare that's doing it. But the snare is doing it in a good way. So I'm going to add Joey Sturgis's JST clip on the drum bus. And hopefully I'm not going to have to do anything with it. All I want to do here is just keep that drum bus from doing any more damage. There we go. You know what? No, I'm gonna let it clip. because it's hitting the tape machine in such a way on the master bus. And then, yeah. That sounds awesome. So I'm going to throw in the bass now. Not a bad start. The bass sounds a bit weak though. But the tone we got to begin with I was happy with, so we need to mould that. It's going to need to come up a bit to match the drums. So I'm going to borrow one of these virtual tape machines. Pro tip, if you're in Reaper, you can literally drag and drop an effect into another channel and it will just copy it, settings and all. It's a very nice little time saver. In fact, that's what Reaper stands for, rapid environment for audio production or something. But so if I turn the guitars off for a minute, let's just turn this bass into a growling monster. So let's get some distortion. Actually, the bass is a mix bus technically, so I'm going to add the virtual mix bus at the end, just because it's yeah, he provided DI for all the guitars, which made it all the more fun. But at the start of the stream I was talking about how I had found guitar amps for them first, as if I was doing it like a producer, and then I can always go back to it later. Because for me, finding a guitar amp and a guitar tone is not mixing. It's something you have to do, but it's something I consider to be a prior process. I consider that to be production, then mixing is its own beast. It's its own part of the chain. So, on we go. That's why I said I'd come back to the kick, because as I made the bass more powerful, suddenly the low end on the kick drum just started to get lost a little bit. Now at this point, this is where I do things a little unorthodox. Like, I'm now going to send a little bit of the bass to the room microphones. Or not that much of it, but I find that adding a little bit of room reverb to the bass gives it a character. And also to the kick. Now, I do something similar with the snare, but not quite the same. the snare goes to this one called gate room verb, which is exactly the same room 1 from the BM7 on Verb Suite Classics, but I put a gate in front of it so that only the really hard hits on the snare get to that gate. You all hear me yet? 1, 2. There we go. We're back. That's really weird. Whenever the sound goes, yeah, don't be afraid to tell me, because the temporary solution is to turn off the ID44 and turn it straight back on. Which is bizarre, but, you know, whatever works. I'll definitely be looking into fixing that, but in the meantime, that'll do. So, yes, the gated room reverb. Did you all hear me talking about the gated room reverb on the snare? Which is something so that the rolls and stuff don't get muddied up by a big... Because it's not the only reverb that I do with the snare. I do tend to send the snare to a plate and also a non-linear reverb, but in much, much smaller quantities. So let's start with them at 0 and then add them in. Audio's still off except for voice. Okay, that's weird. Because I can see it coming through the ID44. So, refresh. Back, yeah. Yeah, there's a refresh button in XSplit that seemed to fix it. But yeah, that's really irritating. Technical issues. I never have technical issues until I go live, and then they all go, "Hey, I'm a technical issue. Look at me." Great. That's why the voice mic, for instance, is going through a hardware mixer into a hardware compressor and gate, so that I know they work. I can hear that they work. Oh, that's another thing. Headphones, by the way. I'm mixing on headphones. I know I'm committing a cardinal sin. But if things sound a little strange to you, that would be because I'm monitoring through Sennheiser HD650s, through the ID44 with a separate dedicated 18-volt headphone amplifier, and I'm also using SonarWorks, which is correcting the sound so that what comes out of these is about as linear as I'll hear. And also, yeah, that does affect the sound going to the stream, but it should be subtle enough that what I'm talking about will still stand, and you should still be able to hear what I'm doing, even if the overall balance at the end might not sound quite right. When I hit render and submit that for the contest, that won't have the SonarWorks correction on. Another SonarWorks user. Yes, if anyone here isn't using SonarWorks, by the way, if you check that I did a video on SonarWorks, and there's an affiliate link in there, so I think there's like back to school discounts and stuff at the moment, and if you click that and go through, then that would help me through the referral link. So if you're already considering it, I use it in the studio with the monitors, I use it on the headphones, and it completely has changed everything for me because I can trust these now. Anywho, so the drums with... Let's add a bit of that non-linearness to the snare. I can hear a bum, 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 bum. Basically a snare wire rattle on the ambient mics. There we go. Oh, yeah, thanks. Oh, Greg. Greg. If you're going to buy the 2 notes cabs, if you can get them today, I know you wait until payday, but if you can get them today, if you get one of the packs, there's 40% off until midnight. So, like, in the next 2 hours, there's 40% off using the code back to school. So, I think there's one of the hot pole packs that with 40% off is actually cheaper than buying them separately. Don't quote me on that, but if you have a quick look on the 2 Notes store, there is an offer on that the guys at 2 Notes told me about, which is only valid till midnight tonight. So yeah, 40% off back to school. If not, hey, don't worry about it, but hey, I want people to get money off everything. If I could, I would give everything away for free, but, you know, got bills to pay and all that. There we go. There we go. That kind of snare rattle is now gone out of that track. Okay, so Dropbox sometimes tries to screw me over by not actually saving my main file, but saving it as -new temp. But yeah, I save everything to Dropbox, by the way. It's something I highly recommend. That if ever your computer or your drive dies and you've been working in Dropbox, and I've paid for the terabyte Dropbox, then it doesn't matter. You just open up another computer, sign into Dropbox, and there is every single file up until the minute your computer went bang. Oops, sorry about that. But that also means that when I get back to my studio, because I'm at home right now in Studio B, when I get back to the studio, I turn on the studio computer, and while I'm resetting the studio, doing what I've got to do, it downloads every file I've been working on, and that means that I don't have to worry about file transfer, keeping backups, keeping everything up to date. It's already done, online, synced, and then anything I then jump in and record at the studio, because I make sure every plugin is the same version. I have to bring my iLock with me. That's one downside of iLocks, but it means I just carry on working on the studio machine with the monitoring system and everything, as if I had never stopped working and had to do anything. And then I can go home, look after the baby, do an hour's worth of, say, mix prep, or even doing something like this, and then go back to the studio and carry on, and Dropbox is great. Hashtag no sponsor. So, for instruments, when do you stop using hardware and start using software for mixing? When it's convenient. Honestly, when it's convenient. Does cost factor in? Cost certainly factored in for me in the beginning. Cost factored in for me when I was a university student, and then when I had my first studio, when I had a shoestring budget. I mean, I've still not got a big budget. I'm not on the level of like Joey Sturgis or anyone like that who's got tons of gear. But it really depends on getting the best equipment you can on the budget you have. And then, especially for mixing, for mixing, I now take the approach of get a high quality sound going in. That is to say, use, whenever possible, real guitar amp, real cab, couple of mics, maybe a room mic, with good preamps into good converters, and then that's it. It's all analog. It's all software from there on out because of ease of use and recallability. I don't use hardware compressors anymore. I don't use outboard EQs anymore. I just stopped using it because the stuff in the box sounds so good now that it's down to me to make it sound good, and there's no excuses anymore. It's not like, it's not quite ready. Why? Sorry, the headphones are kind of going blah, 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 left and right, which is odd considering that it's a mono input that's going in from the microphone. Bizarre. But yes, having said that, plugins can cost as well. But I got the Slate Everything bundle pretty much the day it was released because I knew that the stuff they were making was that good. And by making it $25 a month at the time, now $15, it was very affordable compared to the plugins I'd been using. I'd been using Waves plugins because up until that point, they were mostly the go-to. A lot of the amp sims that I'd been using were for convenience because I couldn't afford to have every amp, but I had 1 or 2 good amps. I had a really good Marshall amp. Being British, of course, second-hand Marshalls are really quite easy to come by at reasonable prices. You try that in America with a Marshall, you're generally paying quite a lot. However, a lot of the American amp brands, it's the other way around. I could never afford a Mesa. I could never afford anything like that because if you're watching this in the US, you might be able to find something like a Mesa dual rectifier for something like $600 if you know where to look. You're not paying less than £900 for an old beaten up dual rectifier in this country, and of course after changing exchange rates, that's nearly twice as much. And considering I started life as a touring bass player, that's where most of my money went to begin with. From there, I got some really basic condenser microphone. I had this really god-awful Tascam interface, and then we got an Edirol interface, then a Focusrite one, and now I'm on RME and Audient. And so for me, it's, get what you can afford that works the best. I would spend hours and days, looking at reviews of gear and trying to get to the bottom of what's the best for me for the money. I don't have that kind of time anymore, although I kind of do because I will get equipment and I'll review it for this channel, but I still review it from that perspective of who can afford this? Who's this for? What does this do? Can the layman afford it? And if they can, is it worth that money? I could happily review like a Behringer sound card, and I wouldn't necessarily give it a bad review. Like, for instance, this is in an upcoming video. This is a Behringer Euphoria. It's actually pretty terrible, but for the money that you pay for it, it's not nearly as bad as it would be if you had if you had an unlimited budget. But like, let's say something like an RME Micstacy, which is their several £1,000 8 microphone preamp bank. I'm sure they're incredible. I can't afford one. So that's the sticking point for me is, can I make amazing sounding music with the money I have? And then from there, will that enable me to get more work in to be able to get the next piece of gear? And is it worth the next piece of gear, or do I save up and do I leapfrog that? Or should I be spending my money somewhere else? Where is the weakest point in my chain? And that's hopefully why I think my methodology in terms of gear reviews should be useful to people, because my attitude is I have a set amount of money and I want to improve my sound in whatever way I can. What do I need next? What is not worth the money from my standpoint? Like, now my next upgrade for the studio is probably going to be a set of really nice analog to digital converters. 5 years ago, that was a pointless exercise for me, because the preamps that I had at the time would not have justified upgrades in converters, because you wouldn't have heard the quality difference. Anyway, I'm getting way off track. So, let's just bring in these rhythm guitars. So it's not sounding bad. Let's get this virtual tape over here again, and then let's bring in virtual mix rack on the guitar bus. I don't want to overcook the guitar bus. I do want to put a copy of True Iron on there after the tape, and I want to have this. I'm going to use the 111C because it's the cleanest sounding transformer. Ooh, 25 quid for the amp pack. Is that for the studio pack? Because there's also the essentials pack. If that's got the ones that you're after in it, that's already less money. Yeah. If you don't get them, I understand it. We're all in different situations. I, for instance, am buying absolutely nothing right now because I'm moving house. I'm moving in the next few weeks, so that's going to be hell. So I absolutely understand where you're coming from. The studio, however, has just made a new purchase of 2 subwoofers, which sounds extravagant, and I guess it kind of is. But yeah, that's because the monitoring, I want it to be more accurate, and we're making videos about it. We're doing that in conjunction with Adam Audio. Yeah, so those guitars are sounding pretty awesome, and I didn't EQ them at all. I added, let's just solo them. So I added the tape machine, True Iron, and the virtual mix rack. Without them, it sounds like this. And with. Now, it sounds louder, so that does mess with your perception a little bit. But I took everything below 75 Hz out with this preamp. I'm going to leave the guitar group as it is now, and I'm going to just put EQs on separate guitars. So I'm going to fold these little folders down. That's something you can do in Reaper. If you right click on any channel, there's where are the folder options? There's loads and loads of controls in here, and it can be really quite confusing. So if you right click on the master, show tracks that are in folders is ticked because I want to see them. I could tick master track to show that. Clickable icon for folder tracks to show and hide children. That I turn on because that saves me a lot of time. These little buttons down here are not here by default, but because I've folded everything, I could fold everything down right now into guitar group, vocal group. Suddenly all you see is drums, bass, guitars, solo. I put the clean and the intro guitar separate as their own separate things. Vocal group, I can even put the effects group down to 1. and then there's the original track of Johnny's. And when I'm doing the overall kind of balancing, suddenly I can see everything and I've not had to delete or close or do anything. But if I pop any of those folders straight back open, all the tracks are right there to play with. Boom. It's something that I used to do a lot in Cubase, because I learnt in Cubase back at university, way back in the mists of time. And before they moved to Pro Tools, I jumped on the folder bandwagon, which didn't work very well at the time. Cubase SX3's routing system was so bad they had to completely redesign it. But let's go over these rhythm guitars, because I just want to make them a little brighter but not nasty. Stop. Done. The Eosis Air EQ, just a couple of dBs of that, has suddenly just made that go from that modern John Petrucci sound, which I'm not a big fan of because there's no definition to it, because he uses ribbon mics and the top end isn't there. But that air... and off. And on. That was probably all I needed. Let's just solo the bass drums and that guitar now. Another couple of things I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little bit of room reverb. Just a little bit, and a bit of non-linear to the guitars, because it just makes them pop in a stereo kind of way. I want to bring a bit more mids out in the bass. Okay, and just quickly refresh stream audio. There we go. And can you hear that? Can you hear the music? Come on. I think I'm going to try and turn down the buffer size on this, because I'm absolutely starting to peg... Oh, hello! People's personal informations. After all that, and that mix doesn't exist because it's in its own folder. And this is what I was saying about one of the weird things that happens with Reaper and Dropbox fighting each other. Let's let that load for a minute. Any questions from anybody while we uncrash this thing? Virtual Mix Rack still takes ages to load. Apparently, from what Stephen Slate was saying, Virtual Mix Rack takes ages to load because of an issue with the iLock drivers, and they're going to be finding a workaround fix kind of thing for that soon. So hopefully these long waits will be gone. That'll be nice. I'm looking forward to that. There we go, just take a bit of threshold off the compressor that I'm using for vocals, because it's getting quite heavy. I usually have this mic that's right here quite a bit further away above the camera, I figured it'd be in shot today, but it's actually not. Hot Ball Essentials pack, yes! And the guys at 2 Nuts will be happy to know that somebody has used the discount code. Yes. It's kind of a shame in a way that the deal ends at midnight tonight, because anyone who gets to see this video that's not live is going to miss that. It's a real shame. I wonder why, yeah. Ah. There we go, that's probably what was affecting the vocal sound, is that there was 48 volts going through back to the mixer. Oops. Yeah, shouldn't do that. Yeah, this is how long it takes to load 74, 75 effects. There we go. We back. What's with the busy? Come on, come on, come on, come on. Is that just to do the sound drivers? Yeah. Alright, cool. So if I just plug the ID4 back in, that should go. And yeah. Right, well what I'm going to do for a minute is I'm going to freeze some tracks, which is something I pretty much never do. But by selecting all the tracks that are absolutely hogging the processor... What do you mean rendering region 1 of 3? Yeah, by doing that, oh that's going to cause havoc. Cancel, cancel, cancel. That's right. Let's just do this many and just freeze down some tracks because that saves on processor power. If I was at the studio, I'm running on a Skylake 6700K and that would not have any of these issues. But my old trusty laptop is starting to hit its limit. Don't have acoustic drums, but you're considering it. Did I have that issue when I was starting out? Yes, very much so. My advice, don't get acoustic drums. Just don't. Unless you've got a lot of space, a lot of acoustic treatment, a lot of microphones, and a deep working knowledge of tuning drums, get an electric kit. And get something like either Stephen Slate Drums 5 or Superior Drummer 3. Because that's how I learned at university with real drums, but I really learned how to mix by going back years later and using things like Stephen Slate Drums, which is mostly kind of pre-mixed, and Superior Drummer, which is completely unmixed, learning how the best drum sounds in the world should sound. Then learning how to mix with those. Right, there we go, we should be back again. That's really, really, really annoying. I don't think I'll use the ID44 again. Yeah. What? Yeah. No, so I was using things like Superior Drummer as my goal out of here's how it should sound, and then going, well, if that's how it should sound, how do I get it there? And from there, so picking up from that, that's from having these perfectly recorded drums and then mixing from there, I was getting some great sounds, but then having drums that were not perfect and getting them to sound perfect in the room, then being able to mix, that's how I get some great acoustic sounds. So my advice, if you're thinking about getting acoustic drums, is don't, unless you can. If you have a soundproof space, if you can get fresh drum skins, if you have a full set of microphones for the drums, including room mics, and enough preamp channels to warrant that, go for it. But you will get better results with something like Superior Drummer and an electric kit. And even up till maybe a year ago, I still found that with a lot of drummers, the best approach, I was using real cymbals by that point with overheads and room mics, but using mesh-headed drums by a company called Joe Becky, but they were essentially on par with the Roland TD-50. So the real, like, handmade mesh shells. And that was getting us some of the best sounds that really could kind of blow the house down. And so, yeah, doing that was crazy. How many frames? Lots of dropped frames. That must be early on to have over 2,000 drop frames. That's a lot of drop frames. Oh, and the computer's trying to upload everything all at the same time as well. Great. Yeah, dropping a lot of frames because let's pause syncing. There we go. Right. That'll bring the drop frames issue to a close. Yeah, so yes, that was my approach for a long time, was to have electric drums. The cymbals were the first to go. Then the shells eventually, when I learned how to tune drums by note rather than by tension. And from there, it's still been quite a hard road, but if the drums sound right in the room, then they'll sound right on the microphone. Just something I learnt the hard way was, no matter how good your microphone placement is, if a drum sounds bad, you cannot fix it. So keep that in mind. There are plenty of good tutorials out there about how to tune drums. That's probably the most important thing. People think you're an absolute god if you're a musician who can tune drums as well. I really was surprised by this. But this band that I play with, I play every week in a wedding band, by the way. That's how I earn a lot of my money, as well as the studio. And being the bass player and main singer, you wouldn't think that tuning drums would be a great asset to have, but you'd be surprised how many drummers don't know how to tune drums, and tune drums quickly. And learning how to do that, I used the Creative Live class that Nolly and Matt Halpin from Periphery did to really confirm what I'd been learning, because Nolly went through it step by step, talking about tuning to notes rather than tension, and yeah, he absolutely nailed the hat on the head, so to speak. So, I've frozen some tracks. My processor usage has gone way down. That's good. So now I just want to look at these rhythm and high guitars together. Right, so they're not cutting through at all. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give them loads of transformer push from True Iron. So the next thing I'm going to do there, how to make my secondary guitars jump out. I'm going to use more of this non-linear reverb on them for a start. You know what? Where's all my processing power? Is it all... A lot of it's the master. So what I am going to do temporarily is I'm going to turn off all my master effects. That's really ipping all over the place. Let's just freeze the snare and kick as well. That's gonna do bad things, I think. Because yeah, the snare's gonna clip all over town. But we'll leave it like that while we get the rest of this mix done, because this is another thing that you constantly have to fight. This is a really annoying side effect. Let's just see what happens if I set the sample. There we go. Buffer size. Yeah. There we go. I also just put in for the SMG drum mixing competition, but that's a whole different kettle of fish. There we go. Hopefully. So I'm going to take a bit of low end out of this. Add a bit of 5K shelf, maybe? Because I don't want this secondary guitar to be any louder than the first guitar. But what I do want is for them to pop. That's really annoying. Right, so I've used Joey Sturgis's side widener there to try and bring a bit of stereo-ness out to those secondary guitars, because I'm not as worried about phase and that kind of thing on a secondary instrument. Right, so that guitar now sounds really kind of annoying and shrill. So I'm going to take that down, take that shrillness right out and add a bit of 1.5K maybe, I guess. Can you hear me? Yeah. One, two, one. There we go. That's really annoying. But yes, so we were just waiting for 6 guitar amps to render down. You probably can't hear that unless I refresh it. There we go. Okay, can everybody hear me now? I've done well not to swear well. Yes, I do work with the public a lot, and I also, interestingly, that's something that I found fascinating about Glenn Fricker, is that part of the reason that he's become so famous is because of his foul mouth. I can swear with the best of them, honestly. I'm not some sort of like good Christian soul or anything, but I want my channel to be, what's the word? Not necessarily clean. I want my channel to be accessible. Yes. Yes, this is irritating me greatly, let's put it that way. Nice. So I'm just going to bring another virtual mix rack onto that extra guitar. I'm just going to... So I've scooped out everything below a certain frequency. In this case, I landed on 83, 84. I just scooped that up until the at the bottom just became clean. Without that, it's a bit flubby, and with it. Okay, yeah, I think I am gonna end up leaving a lot of these edits. Well, I'm gonna have to edit this afterwards. I'm gonna have to take this down and then re-upload it later this evening. But I'm gonna leave a lot of this in just to show how frustrating this whole thing can be. I mean, I'm just gonna take this off here. No, I'm not. I'm just gonna take the whole stand and show you the setup. It's it's too dark to see. But yeah, I've got an ID4 going into an ID44, which is kind of a beautiful setup when it works. But I've also got hardware mixer up there behind the box of stuff. And that's going into this rack here so that every time I talk, that gate and compressor does its thing, which should be helping, except that for some reason the gods of sound are against me today. So I'm going to put that back down, and the green of the screen, as it were, there we are, the green screen does its job, and we carry on without swearing. There we are. So, on with the show. Yeah. Still no... so can you guys now hear... Yeah, I'm just going to hit refresh on it anyway. There we go. Yeah, so we've got most of the... what I would call the basic sound. So we've got... I'm just going to freeze these tracks as well, because you can mix on top of frozen tracks, which is a nice Reaper feature. And that then means that something like 10 or 11 guitars are all not trying to be processed in real time whilst I'm trying to mix. That should make my life so much easier. Right, so let's look at this solo. Right, so the first things I've done is add two different types of reverb to that solo there. The non-linear. And the plate, which both have EQs that take loads of low end and low mid flub out of them, because if you don't, your reverbs eat up all your mix space straight away. And then we should just need one copy of mix rack. I do like to compress solo guitars quite a bit, and everyone thinks I'm insane at first. But it does mean that very quickly your solo guitar is held firmly in place. So that's gone from... It instantly sounds thicker, but with sounding thicker, it also, that comes at a price, because it now sounds muddy, so we need to EQ that. So I'm taking out quite a bit of the low end there. Now let's try and fit it in the mix. Right, one thing I'm going to do is that sat right smack bang in the middle of the mix. I'm going to add... Oh, what's it called? Sound Toys... Alter Boy. Is it Alter Boy? Micro Shift. There we go. Micro Shift. Just added in at a small amount should suddenly make it sound huge. So I just moved micro shift before the EQ because I thought that suddenly made it sound quite foggy and muddy again. Right, needs to turn snap off. I knew I was going to have to do automation on this mix, but I didn't think I'd want to do it this soon. I tend, in my mixing, to get overall balances first, then automate levels where needed. But here, the wah section is so much louder, even with that heavy compression. Because of its frequency content, it sticks out, so that needs to come down. Okay, there we go. We have sound. I really appreciate everybody actually saying no sound every time it goes off, because if you didn't, then everybody who watches the stream afterwards is doubly frustrated with no opportunity to fix the thing. So I'm just going to put a very light bit of true iron on the vocal group and a mix rack that only has mix bus. The 4KE channel works really well for me on vocals. So, confession time, I already tried out a bit of stuff on vocal here. So on the main vocal, I'm going to go absolutely heavy on the true iron.
Break down.
Because for me, rock, especially male rock vocals, work exceptionally well with very, very heavy pushing. Just lots of distortion, lots of grit, lots of...
Down.
Lots of everything, basically. Yeah. So, let's get New York in here and push that. No, too much. London.
Running out of breath. I'm running out of steam.
So I'm gonna get air in at the end.
I'm running out of space as I pace back and forth in this blasted machine. Running out of breath. I'm running out of steam. I'm running out of space as I pace back and forth in this blasted machine. Running out of breath. I'm running.
How is the sound dipping out so much? I mean, this is really quite annoying. I mean, yeah, the ID44 seems to want to work at 96k and won't change its mind, but XSplit thinks everything's at 48 and is so yes.
I'm running out of steam. I'm running out of. I'm running.
Yeah.
I'm running out of space as a pace back.
No, the thing is, I know you're not trolling, because if I look very closely at XSplit, there is a tiny little meter for the microphone, and when you say there's no sound, that stopped moving, but it's so small in my peripheral vision that unless you say, it's so hard to see that I wouldn't pick up on it otherwise. So it is very much appreciated, but I know you're not kidding because I can see it. Aye.
I'm running out of space as a pace back and forth in this blasted machine. The lion rests his head. The lion's all but dead.
That sounded like a decent vocal. It's cutting through because it's got the... I'm going to drive the tape a bit harder, actually.
I'm running out of space as a pace back and forth in.
And then there's loads of that transformer saturation. Then there's a very fast FG stress with a very quick release. Then there's the optical mode, which is just riding it out. And between the two of those, with that EQ that's just taking a bit of the low mid honk out and adding a bit more warmth in, which actually I might take out.
I'm running out of space as a pace back and forth in this blasted machine. The lion rests his head. The lion's all but dead. The lion.
Right, this is where I get clever, because this backing vocal is quite often just a double. But there's a plugin in Reaper which comes with it called MDA Pseudo Stereo. And if you just whack it all the way to 100% comb filter on your backing vocal, it does this.
In this blasted machine.
It's full.
The lion rests his head.
So off it's in mono.
The lion rests his head.
On.
The lion rests his head.
Stereo. So behind the main vocal, and I'll turn the level down on it a bit.
The lion rests his head.
I'm going to take some of the stress and distortion and everything off the backing vocal so it cleans up a bit, because now it's in the stereo image, I can really hear that start to grit up, and so I probably want it to be not quite as much.
Lion rests his head.
Do still want it to be compressed.
Lion rests his head. Lion rests his head. Lion rests his head.
Yeah, less saturation, and I'm taking the air off the backing vocal as well, because it doesn't need it, because that's doubling up on those high frequencies, and we don't want that really.
Lion rests his head.
I can bring the level back a bit now on it.
Lion rests his head. The lion's all but dead. The lion can't be tamed, can't be shamed into serving the masses disease.
Okay, so that sounds quite good, but it's got kind of an upper mid honk to it now, which is something that actually in real SSL consoles always annoyed me. So I'm just gonna see if I can find it.
The lion rests his head.
Oh, 2.8K, there you go.
The lion's all but dead. The lion can't be tamed, can't be shamed into serving the masses disease. The lion rests his head. The lion's all but dead.
So that's a slight shaping filter that I've put on the EQ on the main vocal there. Let's see what that does in the mix.
I'm running out of steam. I'm running out of space as I pace back and forth in this blasted machine. The lion rests in this blasted machine. The lion rests his head. The lion's all but dead. The lion can't be tamed, can't be shamed into serving the masses disease. Oh, we're getting loose, then we will be completely unstoppable. Oh, just wait, the time is coming soon for us to break out of this cage. Whoa! How did I get here?
Oh yeah, clean guitar, hello.
What has led me to being docile? How could I have let these?
Let's push this guitar forward, but without overly distorting it. So lots of saturation there. FG401 in mode 1. And then take some low end out, push the high end.
How did I get here? What has led me to being docile? How could I have let these bars be placed around my heart and soul? Oh no, it's become my own. I get here. What have to?
Ah, okay. Well, that's weird. Let's unfreeze the bass group.
And me to be. How did I get here? What has led me to?
There was no pre-mixed. We were only sent DIs. So what I decided to do before the stream was I picked guitar amps as if I was reamping them and made sure that they sounded decent, so that's what I... This can't be good for the ID44's, yeah, it can't be good for the ID44's health. Certainly not good if I throw it out a window. It must be some sort of Windows thing. Yeah, everybody's saying audio's out, but it's, we're back now. And, yeah, so the main bass was a Sans amp and just a distressor, FG Stress, which is what I would use in hardware. And then the secondary channel bass grit was a 5150 into the Marshall 8x10 hot pole cab from 2 Notes. Which mixed with that makes Faizan, hi. Let's just take that down for this section.
Night till I wake up from this nightmare. No place around my heart and soul. No, it's become my only hope.
I think it's just become very apparent that that dingy ding noise in the 5150 is kind of spoiling the mix a little bit. So out comes the, oh, wrong one, out comes the Reaper EQ. So that's what I want. This is what I... Oh, that's what I don't want. Why do I add grit? Because otherwise definition does not cut through. Anyone who says, oh, just use a DI for bass is generally, in my opinion, talking out of their backside. Bass DIs do not have the right harmonic information to sit them in a mix. The reason that in hard rock everybody uses an SVT Classic on an 8x10 cabinet is not because it's loud. I mean, live, yes, but the reason that amp has stayed the course is that it adds the right harmonic content that makes it then fit into a mix. The reason that I'm adding the grit here with a separate amp is a bit more of a modern kind of style. Is that someone knocking on the door? The reason that fits into a mix is that extra clang that's at the top with that grit blends with a heavy guitar to give you some attitude and definition and presence in a much more organic way than you can't do that with just EQ. Right, both of those vocals I've just decided have got too much low-end information in them, and so that has to go, and the SSL is great for getting rid of that. Circle of Tone who bashes that method. What? They're using a clean and an amp. No, I've heard the name, but I've come to my own conclusion not because of what anyone else is. I was doing. I don't want to sound like a hipster, but I was doing the cleaner tone and dirtier tone thing 15 years ago. I actually had a bass with dual outputs. In fact, I had two of them. I had a Rickenbacker 4003 with Rico sound, and you could send the neck pickup to one amp and the bridge pickup to another. And I would send the neck pickup to a Trace Elliot with a 15-inch cabinet, and I would send the bridge pickup to a Marshall combo guitar amp. And that sat me in a mix. It wasn't even a metal band, but it sat me in a mix like nothing else I'd ever heard at the time. And I also had a copy of an Alembic, which had a 5-pin XLR out on it. And I did a very similar thing there. And so when I was working on studio stuff a few years later and realised that you can send a track back out, that's always been a way that's worked for me. People have got weird opinions on stuff. And that's okay, as long as you properly explain yourself. I only get annoyed when people go, well, that's wrong, and I go, there we go. The sound is not dead, it's just sleeping, it's pining for the fjords. Hello, Polly! Yes, yeah, I only go mad when people don't have a good explanation of why you shouldn't do something. If you are trying something new and you don't know what you're doing, that's also fine. It's improving your lip reading. Yes, tell me about it. It's improving my patience, if there was such a thing.
What has led me to being docile? How could I have? What has led me to being docile? How could I have let these bars be placed around my heart and soul? Whoa.
Some bass overdrive into the front of an amp, then DIing the signal out back into the interface. What, bass overdrive into a guitar amp or into a bass amp? Something you have to be quite careful of with guitar amps versus bass amps, just in terms of an amplifier, is they often have very different goals in mind in the design. Bass amps generally, I find, are designed to keep the tone of the bass, or at least most of the tone of the bass, fairly intact. Whereas a guitar amp's general aim is to absolutely mutate the sound into something new. So into a bass amp, I mean, if that bass amp has a particular tone that you like, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's working for you, I've used a Hartke HA3500 since about 2003, and to be honest, I only use the effects return on it now. I use it as a power amp these days because I find the preamp in it, it's quite brittle sounding. It makes everything sound a little bit like an ice pick. There is a tube in that circuit. If you open the top, there is actually a 12AX7 in there, but it's not doing a great deal. And the compressor in there, I used to have that quite high up because I'd be playing lots of like harmonics and stuff. But now I find if I even click it on, it's almost too much. Maybe it's because I use quite high output basses, but I just don't like the sound of it anymore. But if the sound of it works for you, there's nothing stopping you. I mean, poor bass tone is very subjective. Try it. If it works for you, give it a go. But my advice with the Hartke 3500 specifically is don't use the compressor in it if you're recording in the studio. Record the amp uncompressed and then compress in software, because two reasons. Firstly, you'll probably find a much more suitable compressor that's much more up to date in the software, and if you don't like it, you can undo it, whereas if you do it in hardware, you're kind of stuck.
What has led me to being docile? How could I have let these bars be placed around my
Why does that start late? That's weird. Nope. That was really weird that the freeze seemed to cut the first few milliseconds off that guitar. So I'm just having to re-render that out now with come on, words. With that little bit added back onto the start, just hoping that that'll fix that little shenanigan. Because we need those to hit. Now, where's that hissing coming from? Because there's a... hissing's coming from in here. Oversampling, that's not to do with noise though. Where was the option for noise in these? Because I can hear a fair deal of hissing coming from places. It'll be from the tape machines. I'll have to go back and... Yeah, it's not quite come together yet, but we're getting there, I think. Here's an idea. I'm gonna send the track to the snare track to the ambient mics. But I'm going to be clever. I'm going to send the snare track to the ambient mics to a new set of channels, and I'm going to put a gate on the ambient mics. Full wet dry auxiliary input, and see. There we go, now my ambient mics pop on every snare hit. See what that's done. Put a bit of pre-delay on this snaring beginner.
Then we will be completely unstoppable. Just wait, the time is coming soon for us to break out of this cage.
My mix isn't finished, but what's interesting is that I'm not hitting the final compressor K-clip at all. Alright, maybe I am. Said we're back. Oh, there we go. Right, okay. There we go. Yep, it was back out because I turned it back off because I couldn't see it on the meters. We're good. It's getting really annoying though, so that's definitely something I'm going to investigate before the next stream. But yeah, I was noticing the drums that I couldn't get that super snare because the ambient mics were almost too natural, so I EQ'd out a lot of the snare out the ambient mics. There we go. Can you all hear the music now? I'm just going to compare this to Johnny's mix. I'm going to turn my vocals down to max. Right, so seeing as though this kick and snare are effects, I would usually use sends, but I'm not going to here. I'm just gonna filter the crap out of these. So for the kick, I'm gonna really use a massive EQ. I'm gonna use Verb Suite Classics before that EQ. Maybe dry wet it a bit. That might be it, actually. Yeah, so dry wet it, compress it a bit with 401. And then it's a lot of hissing from heavily distorted and clean guitars. How do I match them in terms of volume? This is one of those times when I have to give the awkward answer of use your ears. There is no right answer. Generally speaking, meter-wise, clean guitars will be quite a bit higher because there's more transient and a lot less solid harmonic content. So it genuinely is I tend in a mix to sit distorted guitars right first in terms of level, and then use the sonic level matching of the distorted guitars, and then bring the cleans up to that level. That way, when the distorted guitars hit, it doesn't jar, but then the distorted guitars also fit in the puzzle of the rest of the mix. Generally, especially quite spiky clean guitars can fit in a mix more because the transients can poke out and catch your ear, and they don't necessarily have to be loud, necessarily. So, let's get a big... What am I doing? I don't want reverb. I want Verb Suite Classics again. Actually, that I was going to go, oh no, that's terrible, but that works in my favour this time, actually. So I'll take all the low end and filter the top off. And I'm going to use Echo Boy, which is my favourite delay unit. I'll want to do dual echo, I think. Is it just half straight? let's move that echo boy in front of the filter. More dry wet on that echo, more width, less low end, longer. Right, the very split second that guitar ends, I want the master track to literally just go silent. And then come back there. Because then, that's a nice little trick. Catches your ear. Your ear goes, oh! It's something that Mick Gordon did a lot in the Doom soundtrack. I really quite liked what he was doing there. I'm just going to turn this into a region so I know where the song starts and ends. Something's not right with the timing. That delay. At this point in the mix, all my automation lanes come out to play. let's just bump the guitars up a bit at that point. Not a huge amount, just enough that they become a feature just for 20 seconds. One, two, there we go, yep. Right, so I was literally asking if you could hear me because I need to stop. Any tips when it comes to mixing 6 versus 7 or 8 string? Honestly, no. There seems to be a bit of a myth that 7 or 8 string guitars should be treated differently. If your methods work in the first place, it shouldn't be any different, because low-tuned 6 strings are almost the same as a 7 string, and as you go below that, your lowest fundamental is already going to be inaudible and probably scooped out in a mix in terms of EQ, in terms of using a tube screamer or something like that to get rid of that flubbiness at the bottom. So if your sound is right on a 6 string, it will be right on a 7 or 8. And you probably need a bit less gain in your tone than you thought as well. And turn the bass down on the amp. That's about it, really. Yeah, it's not what a lot of people try and say it is. Definitely don't add more mids to a guitar just because it's got more strings either. No. It's more pickup dependent, and don't forget 6 out of those 8 strings on an 8 string are the same as they were before. So if your tone is decent, it shouldn't need anything doing to it. Bring that down a bit. It's cool, but it doesn't need to be that in your face. I'm going to get rid of that last note on that guitar. And I'm going to really bring that up. And extend it. Right, so I'm doing a bit of an audio switch at the end and taking that scream down a bit and bringing the singing quite up. Right, so I'm going to hit save. I'm going to listen from the beginning, and then we're probably going to do an automation pass where we start bringing little things up, little things down. Then we're going to start looking at adding a few special effects. And in principle, at least, that should be it. I'm just going to go into these tape machines and turn the noise reduction down. Let's just see. It's really quite annoying that there's so much hissing going on. Hopefully, yeah, they've all got auto off on them, which doesn't help in tracking that noise down either. I mean, yes, they sound like a real tape machine, but by the time you've got 30 of them going, being slammed fairly hard, it can be a bit annoying to have that noise on by default. I'm just gonna oh, red box appear with the sliders. Yes, that's to tell me that my channels are going above 0 and are clipping. Well, it's not clipping. It's telling me if I was to export that as an analog file, that not as an analog file. If I was exporting that as a WAV file, that would clip. In Reaper and most good audio production workstations, if this little bit where it now says -inf, let's just make, yeah, if that goes above 0 in something like the latest version of Pro Tools or Logic or anything, that's fine, because that then passes that information onto its parent folder or to the master bus where it can be dealt with, and that's why I've got things like K-clip on the output there to stop that from getting out and being rendered as a digital clip. It only happens on the snare. Looking at it, I think that's the only track in the entire thing is the snare that clips. Although, because that's being side-chained over to the ambient, we're seeing that mirrored on channels 3 and 4, which we don't hear, and also passed up through the drum group, which is that channel being fed here. And then that's going through to the tape machines and the mix rack and everything that are handling that. Ideally, I wouldn't want to see that on any channel, but on the snare it's quite common because there's so much transient information there. And in this case, seeing as though it's the only track doing it and it's only by 1 dB and it's being handled at the end, I'll live with it. It's not ideal, but it's okay. Oh, that got louder. Let's get Echo Boy going on another bus. Ping pong it. Right, full wet. Oh no, that is not what I want. I want. Right, so I want to take all the low end and a lot of that mid peak out of that delay. And even soften the top off. Right, here's something that I do a lot, and it's something that I learned from Andy Wallace, from the mixing of hybrid theory, which is he automates a lot, but he'll do things like he'll bring a delay on for a single word. Listen to this.
I'm running out of breath. I'm running out of steam.
So it's very Andy Wallace thing to do.
I'm running out of breath. I'm running out of steam. I'm running out of space as I pace back and forth in this blasted machine. The lion rests his head. His head. Rests his head. Rests his head. Rests his head. The lion's all but dead.
See, the reason I'm doing this is that if you have a delay on all the time, not only does it make everything sound really muddy, but it loses the surprise to the ears. So by only having it on key words, key phrases, it suddenly becomes a feature. I'll add a bit of high end back in, I think.
Out of breath. I'm running out of steam. I'm running out of space as I pace. The lion rests his head. The lion's all but dead. The lion can't be tamed, can't be shamed into serving the masses disease. Oh, we're getting loose. Then we will be completely unstoppable. Just we're getting loose. Then we will be completely unstoppable.
Right, so like I want to add delay on that unstoppable, but then not on the next oh.
Just wait. The time is coming soon for us to break out of this cage. Whoa. How did I get here? What has led me to being docile? How could I have let these boys get here?
Right, so I'm gonna leave that whole "how did I get here" line with a delay, but then take it away so it's clear.
What has led me to being docile? How could I have let these bars be placed around my heart and soul? Oh, no.
I'm beginning to wonder if the audio dropouts are something to do with the fact that I had older Audient drivers on the computer and I updated them just before I went live. Right, I'm going to cut the delay off halfway through that, so it's epic, but then it's gone. No, I'm not. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to keep the delay going to there, and I'm literally going to automate the delay to turn off at that exact place. So let's see what we've got now, because it's all got a little bit... This is what happens when you start automating, is you end up with all these lines and lines everywhere. I'm just gonna take the rhythm guitar up a bit there. There's a barber. Where do I put a noise suppressor in my signal chain? Short answer is I don't. I don't use a noise suppressor if I can help it. If you need a noise suppressor, chances are something is wrong with your rig. Either your power supply for your pedals is bleeding, or the gain on your amp is too high, or any number of other things. Like you might have audio cables and power cables that are running next to each other. I make sure that on my board all the audio goes one way and the power goes another way. I use a battery bank wherever possible instead of a plug-in, even for ISO power. I make sure, yeah, even with high gain sounds, I make sure that everything's cascaded properly. I don't remember the last time I used a noise gate. If I was going to use one, I would stick it right at the start of the effects chain. So, like, right in front of where, even next to the tuner, because that's the most effective place for it. I would only use one in a live setting, because depending on what venue you go to, the power might be horrible in it. I was probably just repeating myself anyway. Let's be honest. I do, when people ask me a question, I tend to answer it 3 times. Without a gate, how would I deal with 60 cycle hum from single coil pickups? Stand away from the amp. And then get used to 60 cycle hum. It's not nearly as loud as you think it is once you get playing. If it is, your gain is too high for single coil pickups. That's generally another thing. That's pretty much why humbuckers were invented. You can get humbuckers that are fairly reminiscent of single coil tone. You can get stacked single coil pickups that eliminate the 60 cycle hum, or in my case 50 cycle being in this country. But yeah, you'd be surprised how much of that you hear in the room. Once you start playing, nobody notices. And if it's really that loud, again, you've probably got the wrong gain structure for those pickups. There is a certain plasticiness about these guitars that I'm going to try and remove. There we go. So for those guitars, now that I've got the overall sound almost there, I'm going through and I'm making these very narrow little cuts in what sounds plasticky and built up and doesn't sound right, and I'm compensating with a little bit of a boost in frequencies that sound right. Stop to turn my headphones down there because it's starting to get a bit much in the old ears. Oh, that's where I was before. I never actually radio affected the intro guitar. So if you put shelves on this and you turn the bandwidth down, you get well, if you notice it when you play, but yes, well, it's the kind of thing, yeah, you'll notice it when you play because everything in the room is really loud. As soon as you step away from the amp and play at a reasonably loud volume, your guitar is so much louder than that hum that it doesn't get noticed. And the other thing is, once it's recorded, if there is some in there, you can always just get an EQ, find exactly 60 Hz and just notch a bit out. we should be back. Yeah. I'll reset. Yeah, refresh that. There we go. Alright. It's getting really annoying. But yeah, I'm mostly just doing level automation now, although you may have just seen me throw pretty much all the reverbs and stuff at the solo. I tend to use quite a lot of short room reverb on a guitar solo. That. Let's listen to this guitar solo with no, just dry, so just no reverb. And then with a room reverb. So much bigger, and then with a bit of plate and the non-linear, which is very short, controlled reverb. And then with a bit of that delay as well. I'll add a bit more of that. Right, so I'm going to automate the volume of that delay to be bigger at the end, because it's a big finale, but then it goes dead right at the end. Alright. I think that's us. I'm just going to bring the rhythm guitars up at the end. And doubly so, bring the rhythm guitars up. Okay, hold on to your hats, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm going to crank this up a couple of dB in K-Clip. And I think that should match the original. Right, one more listen through, see if anything stands out to us, and it seems like we're almost ready to send this off to Johnny. bring the vocals down a twit. It's dropping out way too much. I'm gonna have to work out why that is. Right, one thing is that, I'm gonna add some effect. I'm gonna add a micro shift, but I'm gonna go absolutely crazy with it. Micro shift is based on the old Eventide harmonizers that could pitch shift a little bit, and so what they would do is they would have one on the left slightly down, one on the right slightly up, and middle as normal. And it would sound huge. It would sound like this.
Oh, we're getting. Oh, we're getting loose.
So if I now automate microshift bypass, so it's just only on when we want it. So it's just off all the time apart from. See if it.
We're getting loose. Disease. We're getting loose. Disease.
What?
We're getting. We're getting. We're getting loose. Then we're getting.
Oh, that's weird. Oh, it's not weird at all. DS and mono is mono. Let's put DS as stereo in instead. Minus 19.4 it was.
We're getting loose. We're getting loose. Then we will be completely unstoppable.
And then throw that on there again.
Just wait.
Just pump up that unstoppable. That O is a little late, so I'm going to move it back. gonna push the vocals up there a bit.
Time is coming soon for us to break out of this cage.
That needs pushing up by dB. This is what automation passes are about, because in that little bit there, the guitars are really going at it, so the vocal needs to be pushed up a bit.
Time is coming soon for us to break out of this cage. How did I get here? What has led me to being docile? How could I have let these bars be placed around my heart and soul? Oh no, it's become my only home. Oh no, I will not rest until I wake up from this nightmare.
I have to say, the bass does sound good, but it's mostly just well recorded. But, yeah. So the trick to a bass like that is copy the same bass twice. The way that I did that was I used a pre-FX send rather than 2 copies, but either way works. One with a Sans amp and then a distressor compressor. Really hard, really fast release, keeping that clean bass in place, and then also a 5150 guitar amp with not too much gain on a second channel with a bass cab after it. Then a bit of clever EQing to make sure it's not nasty, and then not as much gain as you think on that 5150 because it's a high gain amp and you're pushing a bass into it. But between the two of them combined, all I've done is put it through a tape machine, which just gives it a bit of fatness, a bit of drive, a bit of compression, not even a lot of compression, some EQ to make it fit the mix, and then a bit more saturation. Interestingly, Johnny's toms are a lot more hyped than mine, so I think I'll just quickly look at the toms and see if there's anything I can do. Yeah, there's plenty I can do with the EQ there. Just give that loads more slap. Take a load of ring out. And I can probably send a load of that to the plate reverb actually. Yeah, Metallica, here we come. Okay, you should be able to hear me now, and that's okay that we dropped out because I think that is all we have time for tonight. Oh my word, we've been going for... I started the stream 3 3/4 hours ago, so it's very much time to go. But I'm going to submit this mix to Johnny, and so the next time you'll hear this is in the competition. So it'll be on my channel, and yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, so that's how we do a mix in 3.5 hours rather than spend 2 weeks on it. And so yeah, and that's also with dealing with dropouts and all sorts of so hopefully we'll have less of that next time. So thank you, everybody. Oh, first football game of the year. Well, have fun. And I am going to bed because being English, American football is not really for me, apart from the Super Bowl, of course. Will it stay up? Sure. I mean, I was going to take it down and edit it, but anyone who's watched the stream up to now, or even who watches this afterwards, will know from me saying several times that there's some kind of weird issue, and I'll have to fix it. So I'll just leave it up, and yeah, next time I will have rectified whatever the hell issue that was. So yeah, thank you everybody for watching, and I will see all of you in the next video. There's going to be reviews of the Aston Origin and Starlight coming up, which in a previous video I did say that I filmed them already, but the footage magically got destroyed. I'm also in the middle of editing 13 videos for 2 Notes, actually for their channel, and I've got the ID44, which did have a glowing review until a technical issue here, but hopefully that's just a driver or a Windows thing. And I've got an ID22 in review as well, and a Sontronics Halo. There's so much to do, so that's all to stay tuned for. So thank you everybody, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.